20 restaurant chains from the 1970s that closed their doors for good. There was a time when the American dining landscape looked completely different. The 1970s were full of bold experiments, new concepts, new flavors, new ways of thinking about where families ate and what they expected when they sat down. Some of those experiments became legends, others burned bright and then burned out. These are the ones that didn't make it. Wags. Wags is a chain that surprises people for one specific reason. Most assume it was a Wendy's project. It wasn't. Wags was born inside Walgreens, the pharmacy chain, during a period when drugstores were actively searching for ways to keep customers on the premises longer and spend more while they were there. Opening a restaurant was among the boldest strategies any of them tried. In the early days, the concept delivered on its promise.
Wags positioned itself above the standard diner without pushing into the price range of proper sit-down restaurants, and that middle ground turned out to be exactly what a lot of working families were looking for. The menu was the kind of reliable American comfort food that people never tire of. Burgers, steaks, sandwiches, all in portions that felt generous without being wasteful. Roast beef sandwiches earned a particularly strong reputation. All-day breakfast, at a time when almost no one was serving breakfast past 10 in the morning, became a genuine point of distinction. On a weeknight, you could walk in well past midnight and order pancakes, a club sandwich, or a milkshake alongside your dinner. It was exactly the kind of flexibility that most fast food concepts still haven't figured out. Customers appreciated it. For a stretch, Wags thrived. The problem arrived with a decade that followed.
The casual dining segment was accelerating rapidly in the early 1980s, and the newcomers, TGI Fridays, Chili's, and others, arrived with updated environments, more varied menus, and a sharper sense of what younger customers wanted. Wags had settled into a style and stuck with it. When the landscape shifted, the chain had no answer. The straightforwardness that had been a strength started to feel like a limitation. Walgreens made the decision to exit the restaurant business and return its attention to pharmacy retail. Wags locations were sold off in stages, and by 1991, the brand had been wound down entirely. Chi-Chi's. Before Chi-Chi's, most of Middle America had limited exposure to Mexican food in a restaurant setting. Chi-Chi's changed that. Founded in Minneapolis and spreading rapidly through the late 1970s, the chain reached more than 200 locations nationwide and became largely responsible for introducing Tex-Mex cuisine, in its Americanized form, to a broad mainstream audience. The experience of eating at Chi-Chi's was distinctive from the moment you walked in. Colorful lighting, upbeat music, margaritas arriving in generous quantities, and plates piled high with food that felt festive simply by being on the table. Crispy nachos loaded with cheese and jalapenos, chimichangas that became synonymous with the menu, family-sized portions that made the restaurant a natural choice for any occasion worth gathering around. For its first decade, Chi-Chi's was exactly what it intended to be: a party. The first signs of trouble were subtle. The Americanized Tex-Mex style that had felt exotic and exciting in the early days, heavy on fried preparations, refried beans, and melted cheese, began showing its age as authentic regional Mexican cooking became more available, and as consumers started gravitating toward lighter, fresher ingredients. Chi-Chi's didn't update its menu to reflect those changes. The formula that had worked so well was left largely intact, while the world around it moved on. Then came the catastrophe. In 2003, a hepatitis A outbreak was traced to a Pennsylvania Chi-Chi's location. Contaminated green onions were identified as the source. More than 600 people became sick. 4 died. The lawsuits were financially crippling, and the reputational damage was total. There was no path forward after that. The chain that had once made the country fall in love with nachos and margaritas was finished. Victoria Station 3, Harvard Business School graduates launched Victoria Station in the early 1970s with a concept built around the atmosphere of classic British railway travel. The commitment to the theme was serious. Multiple locations were constructed using actual converted railway cars, and the dining experience was designed to feel immersive rather than merely decorative. The menu leaned on hearty American staples, steaks, barbecue ribs, and the kind of dishes that satisfied without requiring much explanation. Families on road trips, suburban diners looking for something more interesting than a standard restaurant, travelers passing through, all of them found something worth returning to at Victoria Station. By the middle of the decade, the chain had expanded past 100 locations in the United States and had established an international presence as well. The combination of a novel setting and a dependable menu had produced a genuinely loyal customer base. What the brand couldn't overcome was the cost of maintaining the experience that made it special. As food prices and operating expenses climbed through the late 70s, keeping up the quality that customers expected became increasingly difficult. And while Victoria Station held its look and its menu largely intact, a new generation of restaurants was arriving with sleeker atmospheres and more contemporary approaches to food. The contrast was not flattering. The early 1980s brought a financial reckoning. Management decisions that had looked reasonable during the growth years were revealed as overextended once revenues began falling. Interior renovations and menu updates were attempted, but produced limited results. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1986. Most locations were closed before the decade ended. By the early 90s, Victoria Station had disappeared from the American restaurant scene entirely. Bennigan's. Norman Brinker founded Bennigan's in 1976, and with it helped establish what we now recognize as the casual dining category in the United States. The concept sat at a specific intersection that turned out to be enormously appealing. The warmth and informality of a neighborhood pub, combined with food that was good enough and prices that were low enough to make the decision easy. Suburban locations near shopping centers made Bennigan's accessible to exactly the audience it was designed for: working families, young professionals, groups of friends who wanted a relaxed evening without a formal reservation or a significant bill at the end of it. For many regulars, a meal at Bennigan's was less an event than a habit, the kind of weekly stop that worked its way into the rhythm of ordinary life. Birthday dinners happened there. Impromptu gatherings happened there.
The chicken tenders, by the account of many devoted customers, were the best they had ever encountered anywhere. At its peak, the chain stood up well against Chili's, TGI Fridays, Applebee's, Red Robin, and Ruby Tuesday. And some who knew it well argued it surpassed all of them in the combination of atmosphere, portion size, and value. A small number of Bennigan's locations continue to operate in the United States. Most people who were regulars during the brand's prime years would tell you those survivors don't quite capture what made the original so good. Arthur Treacher's Fish and Chips. Arthur Treacher's launched in 1969, carrying the name of the British character actor, and the mission was uncomplicated: serve properly made fried fish to American fast food customers who had never had much access to it. The American fast food market was built around beef, and Arthur Treacher's was making a deliberate bet that enough people wanted an alternative. The bet paid off.
By the middle of the 1970s, the chain was operating more than 800 locations across the country. Atlantic cod, battered precisely and fried to a consistent, deeply golden crisp, anchored the menu. Thick-cut, hand-prepared fries made the ideal accompaniment. And the hush puppies, Those sweet, savory fried dough pieces gave the meal a southern comfort character that felt right alongside the fish. The late 70s brought a set of problems that compounded each other. Health-conscious eating was becoming a genuine consumer trend, and deep-fried seafood was a difficult sell in that environment. Supply issues forced a substitution of cheaper fish for the original cod, and customers who had been coming in specifically for the quality of that cod noticed immediately. Competing chains began offering grilled fish and lighter seafood options. Inside the franchise network, operators were unhappy with rising fees and declining support. The interiors aged without being refreshed. Marketing failed to make the brand relevant to younger customers. The combination proved fatal. Most locations had closed by the early 1980s, and though a few still operate in some form today, the brand's collapse was swift enough to serve as a lasting example of how quickly a fast food concept can unravel when multiple pressures arrive at once. Burger Chef. Burger Chef was one of the most genuinely innovative companies in the history of American fast food, and it has been almost completely forgotten. Founded in 1954, it reached more than 1,200 locations by the 1970s, second in scale only to McDonald's. That context matters. This was not a minor player. This was the second largest fast food chain in the country. The innovations were substantive. Flame-broiled burgers predated the marketing that Burger King would later build an entire identity around. The Works Bar allowed customers to customize their orders with a selection of toppings, a genuine novelty at a time when most fast food chains handed you a standardized product and expected gratitude. The combo meal and the salad bar both trace partial credit to Burger Chef. The Super Chef burger competed directly with the Big Mac and won over a significant number of customers on the merits. General Foods acquired the chain in 1968, and from that point, the management of the brand was never quite right. Quality became inconsistent from location to location. Marketing strategies grew confused and unconvincing. As McDonald's and Burger King sharpened their operations and increased their advertising spend, Burger Chef found itself losing the competitive ground it had spent years building. By the late 70s, the decline was visible in the numbers.
General Foods sold the remaining locations to Hardee's in 1982, and the conversion of those sites to other brands happened gradually over the following years. By 1996, the last Burger Chef location had been renamed or closed. The second largest fast food chain in the country had ceased to exist. Stuckey's. Stuckey's became one of the defining images of American highway travel. What had started as a pecan stand beside a Georgia road in the 1930s had grown, by the 70s, into a nationwide institution, with more than 350 locations scattered along major interstate highways. If you were driving across the country during those years, the teal-colored roof of a Stuckey's stop was as familiar a sight as the road signs themselves. Pulling off the highway meant refueling, stretching, and stocking up. The food was dependable American roadside fare: hot dogs, burgers, Southern-style comfort dishes, but the snacks were the real draw.
Pecan log rolls, pralines, nut candies in a dozen varieties. Stuckey's had built its identity around the particular pleasure of buying things you didn't need but couldn't resist, and it made that experience feel warm and distinctly Southern rather than purely commercial. The teal roof became a beacon. Road-weary travelers oriented their rest stops around it. Families with children in the back seat knew exactly what they were going to find when they pulled into a Stuckey's, and that predictability was part of the appeal. Corporate travel centers with national brand offerings eventually took over the highway landscape, and Stuckey's wasn't equipped to compete with them. The brand contracted steadily as the world it had been built for transformed around it. Lums. Lums began as a hot dog stand on Miami Beach sometime in the early 1950s. By the time the 70s arrived, it had grown into a national chain with a personality that was genuinely unlike anything else in the fast food market. The distinguishing feature, the one that set Lums apart immediately and kept people curious, was beer. At Lums, you ordered a beer alongside your food, something virtually no other fast food operation was doing or would do. The food was built around that personality. Hot dogs steamed in beer-infused buns were the centerpiece, and that detail elevated a simple item into something that felt more considered. The Lums Special, a hot dog stacked with toppings in that soft, beer-soaked bun, was the kind of item customers remembered and came back specifically to order. Burgers and sandwiches rounded out the menu, but the hot dog was always the heart of it. The interior design matched the concept. Dark wood, a bar presence in the corner, a general atmosphere closer to a neighborhood tavern than a fast food restaurant. It wasn't a place built for children, but it found its audience and kept it. The novelty carried the chain through the 70s, but as the 80s brought intensifying competition and changing consumer tastes, Lums ran out of responses. What had made it distinctive was no longer enough to sustain it, and the chain faded out, with most locations gone by the middle of that decade. The Brown Derby. Few American restaurants have carried the weight of cultural history that the Brown Derby did. Opened in 1929, it became the essential gathering place of the Hollywood entertainment industry. The restaurant where you went to see who was there and to be seen yourself. The most celebrated location, built in the shape of a derby hat on Wilshire Boulevard, was instantly recognizable and served as a kind of physical symbol of everything glamorous about that era of Hollywood. By the 1970s, the brand had grown to several locations, including one inside Walt Disney World. That expansion didn't diminish the chain's identity. The menu was refined and classic. Roast prime rib, fried chicken, the full range of American elegance. The Cobb salad, created by owner Bob Cobb and named for him, became one of the most enduring dishes any American restaurant ever contributed to the national table. And the walls, dense with caricatures of the famous people who had dined there over the decades, gave each room a living history that no decorator could have manufactured. Legacy and charm, however, are not the same as financial stability. Business pressures accumulated through the latter part of the 20th century, and the Brown Derby filed for bankruptcy, despite everything its name represented. The iconic chain exited the stage quietly, leaving behind a salad and an outsized reputation.
Wimpy's spent its most relevant American years in the 1950s through the 1970s working to carve out a particular niche in the burger market. The approach was deliberately elevated. Meals served on proper plates, with silverware, in a setting that asked customers to slow down slightly and eat like they were in a real restaurant rather than standing at a counter. The quarter-pound burger was the anchor, and a sausage sandwich called the Bender in a Bun developed its own small but genuine fan base. The experience had real appeal for a certain kind of customer, someone who wanted the convenience of fast food without the disposable feel that came with it. But the appeal was also the limitation. The plates and silverware added friction to an experience that the fast food market was increasingly defining around friction-free ease. And consistency across locations was never strong enough to sustain the reputation the brand was trying to build.
Quality varied in ways that undermined the premium positioning. By the end of the 1970s, Wimpy's American locations had largely shut down. The name persists in several other countries, but in the United States, it exists only as a memory of a burger concept that occupied a distinctive but ultimately untenable position. Beefsteak Charlie's. The roots of Beefsteak Charlie's trace back to the early 1900s, but the chain's most important chapter was written during the 1970s in New York City. The proposition was straightforwardly indulgent. All-you-can-eat steak, shrimp cocktail flowing without restriction, a salad bar stocked generously with pasta salads, coleslaw, and fresh fixings, and unlimited beer and wine, all at prices that felt closer to a neighborhood diner than a steakhouse. The result was a dining experience that felt celebratory even on an ordinary Tuesday.
The chain expanded rapidly along the East Coast through the late 70s, and every night in those restaurants had the energy of a special occasion. Regulars came back because the value was real and the abundance was real, and the food, when things were working, was genuinely satisfying. The economics were always precarious. The volume of food being given away at those prices demanded a level of throughput that was difficult to sustain consistently, and as operating costs climbed through the 80s, profitability became harder to maintain. More damaging than the cost structure, though, was the quality decline that followed. When longtime customers began noticing that the food wasn't what it used to be, that the care that had made those meals worth returning for had faded, they stopped coming. By the early 90s, Beefsteak Charlie's had faded from the New York dining landscape, joining the long list of institutions the city once had and no longer does.
Sandy's entered the fast food market in 1958 with a clear competitor in its sights, McDonald's. The chain differentiated itself through a Scottish heritage theme, a bagpiper mascot, catchy branding, an overall character that felt whimsical and family-oriented in ways that McDonald's Golden Arches couldn't replicate. The signature hamburger cost 20 cents, a price point that represented genuine value, and the milkshakes were thick and rich enough to earn their own loyal following. Growth through the 60s was solid, but the 1970s transformed the fast food industry into something considerably more competitive, and Sandy's found itself outgunned. McDonald's and Burger King were operating at a scale and a marketing spend that regional and mid-sized chains simply couldn't match. Sandy's attempted to modernize, eventually discarding the Scottish theme in search of a more contemporary identity, but in doing so, sacrificed the distinctiveness that had given it whatever advantage it possessed. The brand lost its identity without gaining the resources to compete on new terms. Hardee's acquired Sandy's in 1973. By 1979, every remaining location had been converted to the Hardee's brand. The chain that had positioned itself as a credible alternative to McDonald's had been absorbed entirely. Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken. The story of Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken is a study in the gap between ambition and execution. The chain launched in 1966, drawing on the fame of beloved country comedian Minnie Pearl to establish a Southern-style fried chicken brand with genuine mainstream appeal. The strategy was to go directly at KFC, and for a brief moment, it seemed like it might work.
More than 300 locations opened across the South and Midwest in just a few years. The speed of that expansion was not matched by the quality of what was actually being served. Customers arrived expecting a premium Southern fried chicken experience and frequently left having had something distinctly less than that. The coating lacked crispness. The seasoning was inconsistent. The chicken itself was sometimes undercooked. The franchise network had grown faster than anyone's ability to manage it, and the result was a product that failed to deliver on the brand's most fundamental promise. Financial instability followed. By 1971, the company was facing lawsuits alleging mismanagement and financial fraud. The press coverage that followed destroyed whatever public trust had survived the product failures. Locations closed in accelerating numbers.
By the mid-70s, Minnie Pearl's Fried Chicken had essentially ceased to exist. a brand that had expanded so aggressively and so carelessly that it destroyed itself before it had a chance to succeed. Geno's Hamburgers. Gino Marchetti was already a Hall of Fame NFL defensive end when he co-founded Geno's Hamburgers in 1957. The chain built a strong regional identity across the Mid-Atlantic, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, centered on the Geno Giant, a burger that drew direct comparisons to the Big Mac, but earned consistent praise for having a more distinctive flavor. What set Geno's apart structurally was its early partnership with KFC, making it one of the first fast food concepts to combine burgers and fried chicken under a single roof. For families with mixed preferences, that combination was genuinely convenient. Marchetti's athletic celebrity drew fans into the restaurants and turned them into community gathering places.
The competitive pressure of the late 70s pushed Geno's into the same mistake many growing chains made. It expanded faster than its systems could support. Quality control suffered across the growing network of locations. The reputation that had been built through consistency began to erode as inconsistency took its place. Customer traffic declined through the early 80s. Marriott Corporation acquired the chain in 1982 and converted most of the locations to Roy Rogers restaurants. Geno's, which had been a regional institution, was gone within years of the acquisition. Sambo's. Sambo's was founded in 1957, and over the following 2 decades, it grew into one of the largest restaurant chains in the country, reaching more than 1,100 locations at its peak.
Its all-day breakfast menu built a devoted following. The pancakes, in particular, were a consistent draw, and the casual, unpretentious atmosphere made it an easy and reliable choice for ordinary family meals. The name was a combination of its founders' names, but it also carried an unavoidable association with a children's book, The Story of Little Black Sambo. And that association had shaped the original branding and decorative choices in ways that grew increasingly impossible to defend as American culture grappled more seriously with the legacy of racial imagery. What had seemed acceptable at the chain's founding became a source of mounting public criticism through the 60s and 70s. By the late 70s, the backlash had reached a level that rebranding efforts couldn't manage. Attempts to distance the company from the book's imagery were too limited and too late. Meanwhile, the financial strain of having grown so rapidly had created structural vulnerabilities that compounded the reputational damage. The company filed for bankruptcy in 1982, and most of its locations were closed or sold off in the aftermath. Shoney's Big Boy. Shoney's Big Boy occupied a specific and irreplaceable role in the lives of countless American families. The chain was born in the late 1940s and built its identity around the oversized mascot, the double-decker Big Boy burger, and an atmosphere that made everyone who walked in feel comfortable and unhurried. It was the kind of place that attached itself to routine: the after-church stop, the birthday dinner, the Sunday morning that started at a table by the window with coffee and a plate of hash browns. The burger was genuinely good, stacked with lettuce, tomato, and a sauce that regular customers could identify in a blind taste test. But the breakfast was the experience that people carried with them longest. Golden hash browns cooked to a proper crisp, omelets made to order, bacon, pancakes, and a generosity of portion that made the meal feel like a gift rather than a transaction. The all-you-can-eat salad bar was one more reason to return. The prices were low enough that feeding a family didn't require planning. Changing tastes and intensifying competition gradually wore the chain down. While Bob's Big Boy continues operating in California, most people who grew up with Shoney's would say it doesn't carry the same warmth. What Shoney's had in its prime, that specific combination of dependable food, genuine comfort, and affordable generosity, hasn't been fully replaced. Red Barn. Red Barn arrived in the early 1960s with a concept that was immediately visually distinctive. Each restaurant was designed to look like a red barn, a patented form that the chain received design rights for in 1962. That architectural choice made every location identifiable from the road and gave the brand a character that no competitor was able to replicate simply by copying the menu. The food was ambitious. Flame-grilled burgers, a chicken sandwich that went under the name The Chicken Hungry, a fish option, fresh salads, and an early self-serve buffet setup called the Barn Buffet that anticipated the salad bar before the concept had been fully named. At over 300 locations, Red Barn had meaningful scale. The brand's persistent problem was that it never established a clear identity to match its distinctive appearance. Customers who liked it couldn't always say with confidence what Red Barn was trying to be. A burger chain, a novelty restaurant, a family diner? The ambiguity left the brand without a strong positioning, and food quality that varied significantly from one location to another made it difficult to build the loyalty that consistent quality creates. By the early 1980s, most Red Barn locations had been shut down or converted, and the concept faded out of the market, remembered for its unusual shape more than for what it served. York Steakhouse. York Steakhouse found a specific and sensible niche: cafeteria-style dining inside shopping malls. General Mills founded the chain, and through the 1970s, it opened hundreds of locations in malls across the United States. The setup was built around efficiency and value. No reservations, no long waits, just a tray, a line, and a plate of food that delivered exactly what it promised. The menu was unpretentious and reliable: tender steaks, baked potatoes, warm buttered rolls. Nothing extraordinary, but nothing disappointing either. For a shopper who had spent 4 hours on their feet and wanted a solid meal before the drive home, York Steakhouse was a sensible and satisfying answer. The atmosphere, somewhere between medieval banquet hall and institutional cafeteria, had its own peculiar charm. Changing dining preferences and the evolution of mall culture eventually eroded the customer base. Locations were quietly closed over the years, and the brand wound down without much ceremony. Wetson's. Wetson's was a New York story, almost entirely. Founded in 1959, the chain built a solid following across the metropolitan area over the following decade and a half, operating around 70 locations at its peak. The Big W burger, char-broiled, accompanied by crispy fries, was the signature item, and the retro car hop service that some locations offered added a nostalgic warmth to the experience. The signage was large and easy to spot, giving Wetson's a visible presence on the streets it occupied. When the chain merged with Nathan's Famous in the mid-1970s, the Wetson's name was quietly retired. The factors that had made it vulnerable were interconnected: inconsistent quality across locations, an inability to adapt strategically to changing competition, high operational costs that were difficult to manage without the efficiencies that larger chains could access, and insufficient investment in brand development and infrastructure renewal. Without a franchise model strong enough to drive sustained growth or innovations compelling enough to hold customer attention, Wetson's couldn't survive the competitive pressures bearing down on smaller regional chains. By the late 70s, the name had vanished. Pizza has always carried something beyond its ingredients in American life. It shows up at the moments that matter: the birthday party where everyone sings off-key, the Friday night when nobody wants to cook, the post-game table still loud with people who don't want the evening to end. These are the pizza places that provided those moments and then, slowly or suddenly, disappeared. Dino's Pizzeria. Most Americans won't recognize the name Dino's Pizzeria, and that's because its story belongs to Canada rather than the United States. In 1959, a 26-year-old Italian immigrant from Sardinia named Salvatore Pito arrived in Canada with limited English, a willingness to work at anything, and a clear sense of where he eventually wanted to end up. He took jobs in construction and worked through whatever came his way until he found his direction, sharing Italian food culture with the people around him. He opened a restaurant in Quebec and later settled in Kirkland Lake, Ontario, a place that felt right for putting down permanent roots. In 1970, Dino's Pizzeria opened there, the first pizza restaurant the town had ever had. Salvatore's purpose was simple and sincere. He wanted to bring people genuine pizza, and through it, a piece of the culture he had carried with him from Italy. What he built became something larger than a restaurant. Dino's became a fixture of the community, a place that drew customers from well outside Kirkland Lake to sit down over thin-crust pizzas in a room that felt genuinely welcoming. Picture a cold Ontario night, stepping into that warm space, ordering something crispy from the oven, and settling in with people you knew. That combination of food and belonging was what Salvatore had been working toward from the beginning. Even that depth of community connection, though, couldn't hold against the forces that were reshaping how and where people chose to eat. Changing tastes and new competition gradually pulled customers away.
Dino's faded from the life of Kirkland Lake, another beloved local institution that the passing of time eventually overtook. Pasquale's Pizza. For many people, Pasquale's Pizza means the Coral Springs, Florida location that opened in 1988. But the story started 2 decades earlier. In 1968, a 16-year-old named George Pasquale Sr. began working at a New Jersey pizza joint called Bruno's Pizza Town, absorbing everything the kitchen had to teach him. By 1974, he had saved $400 and was ready to open something of his own. The first Pasquale's was modest, roughly 150 square meters, tables for about 40 people. He named it after his father, Pasquale. What it lacked in size, it made up for in character. The smell that met you when you came through the door announced immediately that someone in the kitchen cared. Fresh tomato sauce, melted cheese, dough working in the oven. That was not an accident.
George Sr. and his family were committed to quality in every ingredient, and that commitment showed. The menu extended well beyond pizza. Pasta, subs, stromboli, salads, garlic bread, wings, the full range of Italian-American comfort food, priced low enough that nobody had to think twice about walking in. A second, slightly larger location followed in Bricktown, New Jersey in 1984. The growth was unhurried and built entirely on the consistency of what came out of the kitchen. It wasn't enough in the end to compete with chains that had vastly more capital and far greater reach. Larger operations took over the markets Pasquale's had cultivated, and the family business was pushed to the margins. A handful of locations survive today across the United States, a small trace of what was once a genuinely special restaurant. Sammy's Pizza. Sam Perella lost his job at an iron mine in Hibbing, Minnesota, and the path that followed led somewhere nobody would have predicted.
He and his wife Louise opened a small coffee shop to keep things moving. Then Sam started hearing from local veterans, men who had come back from military service, unable to stop talking about a dish called pizza. Sam decided to find out what all the conversation was about. He traveled to California, learned the craft properly, and came back ready. He and Louise found a larger space in Hibbing, brought in the equipment, and on October 2nd, 1954, Sammy's Pizza opened. It was among the first pizza restaurants in the city, and curiosity drew people in from the beginning. But curiosity alone doesn't explain why they kept coming back. What Sam and Louise had built was a kitchen that operated with genuine care at every step. Vegetables were fresh and cut by hand. The meat was sourced locally. Wisconsin mozzarella was shredded in-house,
rather than arriving pre-packaged. The spaghetti was made in a way that customers talked about for years afterward.
None of these details were visible to the customer, but all of them were tasted. Eating at Sammy's felt like being fed by people who wanted you to enjoy your meal. And that feeling is not easy to manufacture. It's the kind of thing that stays in people's memories long after the restaurant itself is gone. Petro's Pizza. Petro's Pizza grew out of Longview, Washington, where Norm Colby founded the chain in 1957. The brand found its footing steadily through the 60s and 70s before Colby sold it to the Campbell Soup Company, which brought in the capital necessary to push expansion further. Under Campbell's ownership, roughly 60 new locations opened across Oregon and Washington before the chain was sold again in the late 1980s. What made Petro's work was the atmosphere it created for families. The large tables and open floor plans were built to accommodate groups, and families responded by making the restaurant a regular destination for birthdays and school events. The buffet, a rotating selection of pizzas and salads at a fixed price, meant that everyone at the table could find something they wanted without the evening turning into a negotiation. Kids moved around freely. Parents ate without rushing. The place had the easy warmth of somewhere designed around the people inside it. At its height, Petro's operated nearly 80 locations. But the 90s brought a competitive environment that a chain of that size and structure couldn't navigate successfully. After passing into the hands of outside investors, Petro's filed for bankruptcy in 1994. Later ownership changes couldn't restore what had been lost. Fewer than 5 locations remain in operation today. Red Barn earns a second mention here because pizza was a genuine part of its offering and a real draw for loyal customers. The chain was founded in 1961 in Ohio and grew to more than 400 locations across the United States, Canada, and Australia during its peak years. The barn-shaped buildings, design patented in 1962, gave Red Barn an immediately recognizable presence on any street or highway it occupied. There was something inherently welcoming about the shape, something that signaled warmth rather than efficiency. Walking into a building designed to look like a farmhouse, sitting down and ordering pizza felt genuinely different from the standard fast food experience. The menu was broad: the Big Barney burger, fried chicken, fish sandwiches, a salad bar, and the pizza and melted cheese combinations that brought regulars back specifically to eat them. The jingle, "When the hungries hit the Red Barn," was the kind of thing that lodged itself in people's heads and reappeared at odd moments for decades afterward. Red Barn made repeated efforts to survive through the 90s and into the early 2000s, but competition intensified and the economics turned against it. The buildings are gone. The image of that distinctive red silhouette is not. Shakey's Pizza Parlor. No other pizza chain can claim what Shakey's can. It was the first pizza franchise in the United States. Founded in Sacramento, California in 1954, it took its name from founder Sherwood Johnson, whose friends had given him the nickname because nerve damage sustained during a bout of wartime malaria had left him with a visible tremor. He chose to make that nickname the name of his business. The opening weekend was not auspicious. The pizza oven hadn't arrived in time, so the only thing available to serve the people who showed up was beer. The money made from beer sales that first weekend funded the ingredients for the pizza that went out on Monday. It was a rough beginning by any measure. What followed was extraordinary. Shakey's became a phenomenon, built on a combination nobody had thought to try before: pizza and live jazz music performed inside the dining room. Customers didn't come only to eat. They came for an evening, for the sound of a saxophone moving through a room full of people, sharing a meal, and actually paying attention to each other. Shakey's is credited with contributing to a genuine revival of jazz in Sacramento during that period. The atmosphere it created was specific and impossible to replicate by simply copying the menu. But the uniqueness that made Shakey's remarkable also made it fragile when conditions changed. Multiple ownership transitions complicated decision-making and diluted the consistency that had made the original concept work. When customer tastes shifted quickly, a business built so specifically around a particular kind of evening couldn't adapt easily. Shakey's faded from relevance. Most people today recall it only dimly, if at all, a reminder that originality and longevity are not the same thing. Mr. Gatti's Pizza. Mr. Gatti's Pizza was the product of a retirement that didn't take. James R. Gaddis had served as an Air Force lieutenant colonel, and when his military career ended, he found that doing nothing didn't suit him. In 1964, he opened a pizza and hamburger restaurant in Texas. He and his wife later moved to Austin and opened another location. A customer survey suggested the restaurant needed a stronger name, and his wife's maiden name, Gaddis, won overwhelmingly. The restaurant became Mr. Gatti's Pizza. The product was worth the name. The tomato sauce, made from freshly harvested tomatoes, was something customers described with the kind of language usually reserved for much more expensive meals. The cheese, smoked provolone, gave the pizza a distinctiveness that standard mozzarella couldn't match. People came because the pizza was genuinely good, and they came back because it stayed that way. Through the 70s, investor interest grew, and the chain expanded well beyond its Texas roots. The 80s added game rooms and buffet counters, a combination that turned Mr. Gatti's into a full family destination. Parents could sit with their food, while children disappeared into the arcade, and everyone left satisfied. It was the chain at its most vibrant and its most popular. Ownership changed hands repeatedly in the years that followed, and each transition disrupted the continuity that had made the brand work.
Mr. Gatti's still operates, but the specific quality that made it a destination during its peak years has not survived the transitions intact. Showbiz Pizza Place and Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time Theater. The convergence of pizza, arcade games, and live animatronic entertainment produced two of the most distinctive restaurant concepts of the late 20th century, and their intertwined histories illuminate both the power and the fragility of novelty-based businesses. Nolan Bushnell, the creator of Atari, opened Pizza Time Theater in San Jose, California in 1977. His idea was to take the video game experience out of adult arcades and place it in an environment designed for families and children. The first location offered arcade cabinets, amusement rides, animatronic musical performances, and a full menu of pizza. It worked immediately, and it worked completely.
Children who had never set foot in an arcade were transformed into devoted regulars, and their parents came along willingly because the food was good and the environment was genuinely fun. Robert Brock had been a partner of Bushnell and believed the animatronic entertainment element deserved more aggressive development than Bushnell was providing. He left and founded Showbiz Pizza Place, opening on March 3, 1980, in Kansas City, Missouri. Showbiz leaned harder into the performance side of the concept and thrived on the same wave of arcade culture that was sweeping through American popular life. By 1984, Pizza Time Theater had run into financial difficulty severe enough to force a bankruptcy filing. Showbiz acquired it. What followed were years of attempts to reconcile the two brands under a unified identity, efforts that produced more confusion than resolution. Then, home video game consoles arrived and matured. Nintendo and what came after it gave children sophisticated gaming experiences they could access from their own living rooms, and the economics that had made these entertainment restaurants viable shifted fundamentally. When the arcade experience was no longer genuinely novel, the animatronic shows began to look dated rather than magical. The business model couldn't outlast the novelty it had been built on. Those who were children during the peak years carry very specific memories. The anticipation before the robot show began, the focused effort of accumulating paper tickets, the careful consideration of what those tickets could be traded for, and the pizza eaten in the middle of all of it, barely noticed because everything else was competing for attention. Those memories are vivid and belong to a time that cannot be revisited. Roundtable Pizza. Roundtable Pizza operated under a slogan that set high expectations: the last honest pizza.
The founder, William Larson, had left high school without graduating, spent 4 years in the Navy, and worked through a series of unstable jobs before deciding to build something of his own. He opened his first pizza parlor in California in late December of 1959 and named it after the large, round redwood tables he and his father had built together during his childhood. Those tables were more than furniture. They were a statement about what the restaurant was meant to be: a place where people gathered around something together, where no seat was more important than any other. Dine-in, takeout, and delivery were all available from early on, making Roundtable flexible enough to serve whatever the customer needed on a given night. By 1978, the chain had grown to more than 200 locations across the country. It was a genuine success, built on a consistent product and a clear sense of purpose.
In 2011, financial pressures forced a bankruptcy filing. The chain emerged from that process the same year, but never returned to the position it had occupied before. Like others before it, Roundtable found that a beloved concept and a long track record are not in themselves sufficient protection against the accumulated pressures of a changing market. Happy Joe's Pizza. The founding of Happy Joe's Pizza began with a workplace reprimand. Lawrence Joseph Whitty, known universally as Happy Joe, was working at a Shakey's pizza location when a manager chewed him out for organizing a birthday party for a child during his shift. His response was not to apologize, but to leave and open his own restaurant. Happy Joe's Pizza opened in Bettendorf, Iowa, in 1972. The philosophy behind the brand was visible in everything: exceptional food, a fun and genuinely welcoming atmosphere, and a particular emphasis on birthday celebrations. Word spread quickly about the experience Happy Joe's created for kids and families. The food contributed its own claims to distinction. Happy Joe's maintained it was the first chain to put taco pizza on a menu, a combination that drew real enthusiasm from customers who tried it. The frozen whipped dessert the chain served under the name yogurt was another unconventional detail that stuck in people's memories. What set Happy Joe's apart from the louder entertainment pizza concepts of the same period was its tone. The environment was peaceful and cozy rather than carnival-like, and customers loved it for exactly those qualities. Over time, however, tastes shifted in ways the brand couldn't fully accommodate. Happy Joe's contracted significantly from its best years and never recovered its original scale, a business born from frustration, shaped by genuine hospitality, and ultimately limited by the same market forces that caught up with everyone else. Straw Hat Pizza. Straw Hat Pizza was founded on July 10, 1959, by Charlie Olson and Bill Henderlong, two men who had previously worked together at Mean Ed's Pizza and had come to believe they could do better. The first Straw Hat restaurant opened in San Leandro, California in 1960. The name came from the straw hats that employees at various California pizza establishments wore at the time, a small detail that Olson and Henderlong borrowed and turned into a brand identity. The product distinction was clear and consistent: a lighter, crispier crust than most competitors were serving, establishing a California-style pizza reputation that the chain wore as a point of pride. The menu showed real creativity: vegetable pizza, barbecue pizza, mushu chicken pizza, lemon pepper chicken pizza. Those weren't flavors that most pizza chains were attempting in that era, and the willingness to experiment gave Straw Hat a character that went beyond the crust. The family atmosphere was taken seriously. A free ride for children called Charlie Horse was one of the features that made Straw Hat a destination for parents with young kids rather than simply a place to eat. Dine-in was the primary experience. At its peak, the chain operated more than 200 locations. Then, Domino's, Pizza Hut, and Papa John's expanded their national footprints, and the competitive landscape was reorganized around the chains with the most capital and the broadest reach. A regional chain, however well regarded, couldn't match the marketing budgets or the delivery infrastructure of those operations. Straw Hat's excellent crust and its warm dining rooms weren't sufficient to hold a position against the scale of what was coming. Sbarro. The Sbarro story is one of a family business that grew far beyond anyone's original intention and then found itself unable to hold together under the weight of what it had become.
Gennaro and Carmela Sbarro, along with their 3 sons, arrived from Italy and founded the company in 1956. Their first location in Brooklyn, New York, was a Salumeria, an Italian grocery store that quickly became known for the freshness and quality of its food. What distinguished the original Sbarro from similar establishments was the dining service it offered. Customers could sit down to a proper meal rather than simply making purchases at a counter. That distinction mattered to the community around it, and the business grew on the strength of that difference. Through the 70s, 14 additional New York locations followed, all of them supplied from the original Brooklyn location, with Carmela still making her cheesecake by hand. The feeling that everything was fresh, that Grandma Carmela was still somewhere in that kitchen watching over the food, that was what customers experienced, and it was what kept them returning. The difficulties that accumulated in the 2000s were serious enough to prove fatal. The World Trade Center location was destroyed in the September 11th attacks of 2001, a loss that was both devastating and symbolic. Other financial and operational challenges mounted in the years that followed. In 2014, the company filed for bankruptcy, the end of a journey that had started with a grocery store in Brooklyn and a family that believed in making things properly. Pizza Inn. Pizza Inn was founded in 1958 by 2 Texas brothers, F.J. and R.L. Spillman, in a location directly across the street from the Southern Methodist University campus. The proximity to campus was deliberate, and it worked. Students became regulars immediately, and the reputation the restaurant built among them spread outward from there. The innovations arrived steadily, and they were genuine.
The pizza buffet concept, introduced in the late 1960s, was a bold idea for its time. Pay a single price, eat as much as you want, try whatever the kitchen is turning out. That combination of variety and value was irresistible to exactly the kind of customer a campus-adjacent restaurant was well-positioned to reach. Taco Pizza joined the menu in 1979. A dessert pizza called Pizzert followed in 1986. A bacon cheeseburger pizza arrived later. The willingness to experiment never went away. What kept people coming back during the golden years, though, was something more fundamental than novelty: a crust with a specific biscuit-like texture and a slightly tangy sauce that produced a flavor profile customers couldn't find anywhere else. The chain even secured endorsement deals with the Von Erich wrestling family, Carrie, Kevin, and Mike appearing in television commercials, which brought regional celebrity energy to the brand at its most popular. Nearly 800 locations at peak. A bankruptcy filing in 1989. Recovery in 1991. sale in 1994. A brand built on real innovation and a genuinely distinctive product, unable in the end to carry the weight of its accumulated financial burdens. Pizza Haven. Pizza Haven understood early what many businesses take years to learn. Making something easy for the customer is itself a form of quality. Ron Bean founded the company in 1958, and the first location opened in Seattle's University District, steps from the University of Washington campus. Exhausted students who had no desire to leave their dorms could pick up a telephone and have pizza delivered. That was a genuinely novel service in 1958, and it drew customers immediately. Convenience drove expansion through the 60s and 70s. Pizza Haven grew to 42 restaurants across the Pacific Northwest and California. The brand also reached internationally, establishing locations in Russia, Poland, and the Middle East, an impressive geographic footprint for a chain with roots in a Seattle neighborhood. The late 90s brought pressure from national chains with budgets that dwarfed anything Pizza Haven could deploy in response. Leasing difficulties in some mall locations added operational friction, and according to Bean himself, a missed tax payment was among the final factors that pushed the company past the point of recovery. Pizza Haven filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 1998. Nearly all locations closed. A small number survived at Seattle Center. Noble Roman's Pizza. Noble Roman's built itself on a predecessor's failure. In 1969, Stephen Hughes and Gary Kennard purchased a pizza parlor near Indiana University that was failing, turned it around, and formally incorporated as a company in 1972. Hughes was a business school graduate, and he approached the operation as a serious enterprise built on a foundation of product quality. The commitment to that foundation was operational, not aspirational. No fillers in the meats, no shortcuts in the cheese. The pizza dough was made from specially milled, high-protein flour blended with cornmeal, a recipe that produced a crust with a flavor and texture that set Noble Roman's clearly apart from the competition. Quality wasn't something the chain talked about in its marketing so much as something customers simply tasted when they ate there, and they noticed. Growth was natural, given the product's quality. As the university community expanded and student populations grew, Noble Romans benefited from a loyal and expanding customer base. The chain moved from Indiana into Ohio and additional states through the 70s and 80s. By the mid-2000s, it had surpassed 1,000 locations, a remarkable journey from a failing pizza parlor near a college campus. Operational difficulties accumulated over time, and franchisee lawsuits followed, alleging problems with how the system was being managed. The number of locations declined. The company that had built itself on a competitor's failure found itself facing its own, and could not fully resolve it. Pistol Pete's Pizza. When Pistol Pete's Pizza opened its first location in 1974, the concept was modest, a neighborhood pizza restaurant with a cowboy-themed identity. Over the following years, the chain evolved into something closer to Chuck E. Cheese's, a full entertainment experience built around pizza and an extensive floor of arcade games. That evolution made Pistol Pete's a reliable destination for birthday parties and family outings, with games calibrated slightly older than those at Chuck E.
Cheese pulling in teenagers alongside younger children. The food was more varied than the entertainment-focused concept might suggest. Multiple pizza styles and specialty pies anchored the menu, alongside pasta dishes, sandwiches, and salads. There was genuinely something for every person at the table, not only for the children running between cabinets. Peter Piper Pizza acquired Pistol Pete's in 1995, intending to absorb the successful elements of the brand into its own operation. What looked like a sensible business decision was, in practice, the beginning of the end for Pistol Pete's as a distinct entity. The brand was gradually absorbed into its parent company, losing the identity that had made it a destination in its own right. Today, it survives only in the memories of those who celebrated birthdays there, and in the history of a competitor that swallowed it whole. Godfather's Pizza. Godfather's Pizza was founded in 1973 in Omaha, Nebraska.
Greg Johnson conceived it, then sold both the concept and the restaurant to Willie Tyson in 1974. Tyson moved fast. The chain's growth rate was recognized by the National Restaurant Association as the fastest of any franchise in the country from 1977 through 1979. By its peak, Godfather's was operating nearly 1,000 locations. The branding drew deliberately and confidently on the Francis Ford Coppola film, and it was executed with full commitment. The restaurants were designed with a gray, moody atmosphere that felt genuinely evocative of the movie's visual world. Television advertising leaned into the same imagery and produced a slogan that lodged permanently in the memories of anyone who heard it: a pizza you can't refuse. It was the kind of marketing that transformed a restaurant chain into something approaching a cultural artifact. The food backed the advertising up. The pizza was made with generous amounts of cheese and carefully selected toppings that together produced something satisfying enough to stand as a complete meal. Breadsticks, fries, cookies, and pasta rounded out the menu. Customers could choose among original, golden, mozzarella-loaded, and thin crusts, enough variety to accommodate every preference at a shared table. In more recent years, shifting tastes and changing dining habits have reduced Godfather's reach considerably. The story follows the arc familiar from so many of the chains on this list: a powerful cultural identity, a product that genuinely delivered, and an eventual inability to hold the ground that the best years had built. Time and taste changed, and the offer that had once seemed irresistible became one choice among many, and then fewer locations, and then mostly memory. Those are all 20 names from each list. Pizza places and restaurant chains that were once woven into the ordinary rhythms of American life: the birthday dinners, the highway stops, the Friday evenings, the Sunday mornings. They are gone now, most of them completely, a few in diminished form. If any of them were part of your story, you already know exactly what made them worth remembering.